In 2022 and 2023, an incredibly strange anomaly appeared across the American Midwest. Massive lots outside major auto manufacturing plants began filling up with brand new, beautiful trucks and cars that simply sat there. They couldn't be sold because they were missing a few essential parts. This paralysis hit small and medium-sized manufacturers all over the country. Businesses humming with domestic activity suddenly found their assembly lines frozen and their profit margins crushed because they couldn't source the inputs they needed to finish their own products. Curious, on paper, the United States has a massive, highly capable domestic manufacturing base. We have the factories, we have the workers, and we have the local demand. So why did our production lines suddenly come to a grinding halt? We operate under the illusion of domestic production. We assume that because a product is assembled in an Ohio facility, its materials originated nearby. But assembly is only the final step. The raw materials feeding that factory often come from entirely different continents. To figure out exactly why American workers were standing idle next to unfinished products, we have to trace the supply chains for those missing components backward, and that trace leads us directly to a conflict zone roughly 6,000 miles away in Eastern Europe. Let's look closely at those unfinished vehicles sitting in the manufacturer lots. The entire auto industry bottlenecked over two very specific missing components: catalytic converters and microchips. A modern combustion engine cannot legally or functionally operate without a catalytic converter. It is an absolute requirement for filtering emissions. To build that converter, manufacturers need a precious metal called palladium. Before the war, Russia produced roughly 40% of the global supply. When sanctions hit, that supply chain choked. The second missing component was microchips. To manufacture a modern semiconductor, fabrication plants rely on extreme precision laser systems to etch microscopic patterns onto silicon wafers. These lasers require a specific fuel, semiconductor-grade neon gas. Looking at global neon production before the conflict, Ukraine was the dominant player, supplying roughly 60% of the world's supply. When the invasion disrupted production, it starved global chip manufacturers of the gas they needed. By disrupting just two highly obscure raw materials, palladium and neon, the conflict created shortages that ultimately pushed the price of nearly every vehicle manufactured in the United States to record highs. This effect rippled well beyond the auto industry. In the American aviation sector, commercial aerospace giants were finally beginning to recover from the massive drop in demand caused by the pandemic. But building a durable, lightweight commercial airframe requires massive amounts of a specific metal, titanium. Before the war, Boeing, one of the largest exporters and employers in the United States, sourced approximately 35% of its titanium directly from Russia. The conflict triggered a frantic, highly expensive scramble to secure alternative suppliers for this critical material. Corporate balance sheets capture the headlines. The actual cost of these disruptions, however, falls directly on local workers. When an aerospace or auto plant cannot source titanium or microchips, production stops. And when production stops, hourly shift workers are sent home without pay. That pain then ripples outward to the network of local small businesses servicing those massive factories. The machine shops, the parts suppliers, and the logistics companies all see their contracts delayed, while their own input costs continue to rise. The reality of modern manufacturing is that a geopolitical disruption involving obscure raw materials on the other side of the planet is ultimately paid for, dollar by dollar, by the lost wages of the American worker. The evening news often portrays conflicts as isolated events happening in specific geographic boxes, but in a highly connected global industrial architecture, a contained war is a mathematical impossibility. The nations actively fighting this war sit at the literal foundation of global energy, agriculture, and raw material extraction. What we are watching now is a geopolitical realignment. When major developing economies choose to maintain trade with Russia, they are fighting for strategic control over these essential supply chains. As the global trade system fractures into competing economic blocks, the friction of finding new suppliers and rerouting materials creates a long-term cost. That cost is quietly but permanently embedding itself into American inflation and the overhead of domestic manufacturing. Understanding how deeply these foreign threads are woven into our local economy can feel overwhelming, but the goal here is not pessimism. For American workers, business owners, and investors, recognizing these invisible supply chain vulnerabilities is simply the required first step. You cannot fix a flaw in your financial or industrial model until you can see it clearly. Actively mapping these risks allows us to build real industrial resilience. By anticipating these global shocks and protecting yourself against them, you take the only reliable path towards securing true financial independence.